McGee lost control in the heat of passion when he discovered that his wife, he thought he was getting back together, was in contact with 2 of her prior lovers. That the affairs of the past were not over. And she was not sincere in their efforts to get back together, and he snapped. He lost control in the heat of passion because he really believed that he could make it work. He believed if he forgave her again and again and again that it would work out. And he found out on the night of November 19, 2007, that it was never going to be. Everyone has a breaking point. Everyone has a breaking point. We know the mind works in a strange way. We know that we can rationalize almost any behavior when we love someone. We can make it okay. We can make it better. We can put this family back together. That's what your mind wants to believe. When you truly love someone, that's what your mind wants to believe. Jeffrey McGee was a man who was willing to give everything up for his love of Christine. When she first met him, he was in a rock and roll band, staying out late at night, doing God knows what. And she fell in love with him and him with her. And then she was pregnant. And even when she told him that the child might not be his, he said he wanted to raise that child anyhow. He wanted his family to work. And they got married. And when she said, this rock and roll lifestyle doesn't fit now that we have a child, he said, okay, I'll quit. I was a singer in a band. But I will quit because I want this to work. And he quit. Didn't sing in the band ever again. That was it. He buckled down at work. He got promotions. He worked from 4 in the morning, sometimes till 6 or 7 at night. He doubled his salary. He was doing all that he thought he was supposed to do to keep his family together. And was he the controlling, manipulative person that the Commonwealth wants you to believe he was? No. When he got home from work at night after working 12, 13, 14, 15 hours a day, and Christine wanted to go out, did he say, no, because you're so beautiful, I'm afraid someone's going to steal you from me? No. He said, go. I'll keep an eye on Gavin. Go. Call your friends. Go out. Have fun. I'm just exhausted. I can't go with you. That's not the controlling, manipulative person that the Commonwealth wants you to think Jeffrey McGee is. That's not what happened here, ladies and gentlemen. He told her, go out. Go with your friends. Stay out. Do what you have to do. You're here all day with Gavin. Have fun. And he plugged on and on and on. And we find out, ladies and gentlemen, that there is an altercation and they break up. And they break up because she decides that she wants to go on the Rock of Love. And we all know that the Rock of Love is a reality TV show where you vie for the affections of Bret Michaels, who's a rock star. The life that Jeffrey McGee had given up for Christine McGee. The life that he wanted, but decided to forego for his family. And she did all that behind his back, while they were still together. Sent in an application for the Rock of Love. Told them that she wasn't married. Denied her marriage. Denied her child. Publicly humiliated Jeffrey McGee. This was his wife, the mother of his child, on a reality TV show saying she was single and had no children. The complete embarrassment to Jeffrey McGee should have been enough to make him walk away. But he loved her. And he wanted his family to work. And so yes, he moved out for a period of time. But everyone you spoke to, and everyone he spoke to, he told them how genuinely sad he was that she had done this to him, how it had affected him, how he had tears in his eyes when he explained to people what his wife had done. Not anger, not resentment, tears in his eyes. And he made a bad decision. I'm going to cut off all contact. I'm not going to see her, I'm not going to see Gavin, I'm not going to make it easy for her to go out. That's what I'm going to do. And he is a man of conscience, because after he cut off all contact and didn't see Christine and didn't see Gavin, he realized his actions were wrong. And he didn't just tell Christine his actions were wrong. He wrote a letter to Christine's parents that's in evidence. This is Exhibit 23. He wrote a letter telling them that he was sorry about the way he had ignored Christine and ignored Gavin. He was sorry about that, and that he hadn't behaved appropriately. And that he was grateful for the opportunity to be involved in a family. And that he loved Christine, he loved Gavin, and he was very appreciative for his in-laws in making him part of their family. And he wanted to show them just how much he loved Christine. And he forgave her. He forgave her for the rock of love. And he put all his energy into getting back together with his wife. And you'll hear the evidence that he did get back together with his wife. The evidence was that she stayed over his house on one occasion. That he didn't try anything. That he bought her a bottle of wine. He was on the path to get back together with his wife because he forgave her again. And during this time period, he finds out about Gary Hope. He finds out about Selma. He finds out that the two people she chose to be with during that pregnant period that they were separated after she got back from Rock of Love were rock stars. With the exact type of person she asked him not to be anymore. She asked him to give up for the family. And he should have walked away. And he didn't. He didn't walk away because he loved Christine McGee and he loved his son, Gavin. And so what did he do then? He forgave her. And they got back together. And we know they got back together because on November 19th, they were together. There's text messages going back and forth between the two of them. She has a tummy ache, and he's telling her, "We're having a great day, Gavin and I. We hope you feel better. We'll see you later." And they do see her later. And Jeff drives his son to his mom's house so that they can have a few drinks and try to rekindle this relationship and get back together. And Christine is encouraging him. Because when Gavin is at the house and he says he wants to go home, she says, "This might be your home. This might be your home." She says that in front of Jeff McGee, encouraging him that they're going to get back together. And so he's forgiven and forgiven and forgiven. And now he thinks, it can't get any worse than this. We're back together now. I'm doing the right thing. I'm seeing my son. I'm trying to get back together with my wife. I'm not forcing anything upon her. I'm not being in any way controlling. I'm letting her come and go as she pleases, and I know that she will come back to me. And she did. She came back. When they were at the Train View that night, they were together. You remember that the bartender at the Train View was trying to discourage Christine from getting back together. When she told the bartender, "Yeah, I think we are going to get back together," he said, "Well, I wouldn't do that. Don't rush into anything." But she went home with her husband. And Jeff went and got his son, picked up Gavin at his mom's house, and drove Gavin to his house. And Christine McGee stayed at the Train View and then got her car and drove back to her husband's house. Now, he had only lived in that house for 3 days. 3 days. And when she came there, he was sure that they were going to get back together, that this time it was going to work, that this time there'd be no turning back, that they'd have the family that they so desperately wanted. And we know from the phone records that on the very night Christine had told Jeff that they were going to get back together, she made 2 phone calls. One to Gary Hoey and one to Sally. We know she made those phone calls sometime after she told the bartender and Jeff and everyone else that she was getting back together. She was going to Jeff's house. Those phone calls came in at 7:47 and 7:49. The phone records will indicate that she checked her voicemail somewhere around 10. Now she's with her husband and her child, and they're on the road to getting back together. Why in the world would she need to call 2 prior lovers? Unless she wasn't serious about getting back together. Unless this was yet another betrayal to Jeffrey McGee. Jeffrey McGee discovered those phone calls that night. Gavin McGee told us so. He said his parents were fighting about the phone. We know he discovered those phone calls, and he snapped. Everyone has a breaking point. Now the Commonwealth wants you to believe that somehow Jeffrey McGee planned and intended to kill his wife. And I suggest to you, the man that was described to you as Jeffrey McGee is not the man that they will portray in their closing. He was a man who had 2 other children, who drove his son to football practice every day, who worked every day, who spent time with his son Gavin every day, who spent time with his daughter every day, was in that house every night. If he planned this, why would he go get his son Gavin from his mom's? If his intent was to kill his wife, why would he bring his son home? Why would that make sense? I would suggest, ladies and gentlemen, that there was no intent. That this was a sudden discovery of yet another issue with infidelity that caused Jeffrey McGee to snap. We're not here, ladies and gentlemen, to decide whether or not this was right or wrong. Of course it was wrong. Of course he shouldn't have taken his actions. That's not what this trial is about. It's not about guilt or innocence, because Jeffrey McGee has already admitted that he killed his wife. He's not asking you to say it was somebody else. He's not trying to say it wasn't me. He's taken the responsibility for what he did. He's telling you it wasn't intentional. He had no malice, and no ill will, and no intent to kill his wife. What happened that night was the straw that broke the camel's back. Was the last straw for Jeffrey McGee. Now, the Commonwealth wants you to believe that there was a series of events in which he had abused his wife in the past. And I suggest there are 2 people who told you about that. One was Margaret Barone, who was the heroin addict. Oh, the OxyContin addict, I'm sorry. The other one was the heroin addict. The OxyContin addict, who tells her that she's clean, but she can't remember the date that she stopped using drugs. And I suggest to you, if you know anyone at all who's been an addict, they will know the day, the date, the time, the minute, and probably the second that they stopped using. Because that's important. The day that you turn your life around is important. She couldn't even tell us the month that she stopped, if you believe she stopped. She sat on that stand and lied. She told you first that she got her drugs from the street, and then she said she got her drugs from the hospital. And she lied about Jeffrey McGee. She said he had punched his wife in the past. She said he had put a pillow over her head in the past. There's not a person that has ever said any of those things are true except for Margaret Barone. And you saw Margaret Barone. Do you think she couldn't convince Christine McGee to go get a restraining order if that's what really happened? They were best friends. They were there every day. Margaret Barone loved her friend. She wants Jeffrey McGee to go away for a long, long time. And she lied to make it happen. Don't believe Margaret Barone. There's no evidence from any other source that she was ever injured in any way. Christine McGee's mother took the stand. She never said she saw any bruises on Christine, never any black eyes, nothing of that nature. There's no corroboration whatsoever to that information, none. And I suggest there's no corroboration because it's not true, because it didn't happen. People that she saw every day never saw any bruises on her. People that she saw every day never believed that she was in fear from Jeffrey McGee. Jeffrey McGee loved his wife and loved his child. And when he discovered that infidelity that night, he snapped. The Commonwealth wants you to concentrate and focus on Gavin McGee's testimony. And I suggest to you, it was heart-wrenching. Heart-wrenching to have a 6-year-old on the stand describing what this little boy had to describe. And I suggest to you, completely unnecessary. Jeff McGee had already admitted he had killed his wife. So don't get distracted by the sympathy for that little boy. Of course we feel sympathy for him. Of course we do. But that's not what this is about. This is about what was Jeffrey McGee's intent on the night of November 19th of 2007. And the way that you determine someone's intent is by their actions. And all of the actions leading up to that night suggested Jeffrey McGee was a forgiving, loving, caring husband who spent a lot of time with his children and provided for his family. Now the Commonwealth is going to want you to believe that this was planned, that somehow Jeffrey McGee had a malicious intent, that somehow stabbing someone 5 or 6 times has to mean you meant it. But what if you just snapped? What if you just lost total control? What if that's what happened that night, ladies and gentlemen? And how could it not? How else do you explain Jeffrey's behavior? How else could it be other than he lost control in the heat of passion? And we know people lose control. We know mothers sometimes hurt their own children after they give birth. We know it happens. We know the mind is a fragile thing. Jeffrey McGee thought his family was back together. He thought that Christine McGee was serious about getting the family back together. He thought he had a chance at putting his family back together. He forgave, and he forgave, and he forgave for the chance to put his family back together. And that night he snapped. And you'll remember the testimony from the witnesses at the accident scene. And the Commonwealth's going to want you to believe he drove right into that truck with Gavin in the car. And of course there was an accident and Gavin was in the car. But what was Jeffrey's state of mind at that time? He had just killed his wife. He was remorseful. The Commonwealth's going to say consciousness of guilt. That's why he committed suicide. He was remorseful. This was the love of his life. He slashed his wrist. He stabbed himself 5 times. He wanted to die. That's remorse, ladies and gentlemen, not consciousness of guilt. Remorse. He told the emergency personnel he wanted to die. The emergency personnel said he was steering straight ahead, not even paying any attention to the fact that he had a 3-and-a-half-year-old in the car. Does that sound like somebody who could form a specific intent to kill his son? If he can't even manage to have a conversation with Gavin after an accident, How can he have had a specific intent to kill him? Now, we don't know what happened in the accident, but we know that the Como presented an accident reconstructionist who said he couldn't determine from all the measurements and all of the issues that he looked at that Jeffrey McGee's conduct was intentional. He could not make that determination from everything that he looked at. He could not determine his conduct was intentional. And if it wasn't intentional, he should not be punished for it. He should not be found guilty. When you are not clear in your head, when you are not thinking clearly about the decisions that you're making, you can't be held responsible for those decisions. And in this case, clearly, after he killed his wife, he was not of any solid, stable mind. Now, whether he got a psychiatric evaluation when he got to the hospital or didn't, we all know he should have. He tried to kill himself. He just killed his wife. He wasn't keeping it a secret from anybody. Nobody. Ladies and gentlemen, the Como's going to say that he intentionally put his 3-year-old in that car and drove into a dump truck to kill him. And I suggest to you that's just not bore out by the evidence. The evidence is that Gavin is in the front seat of the car, strapped in. And if you're a parent, you know you do that automatically. You strap your child in, it's almost autopilot that you do it. It doesn't take intent to do that. And we don't even know how long they drove. They could have been driving for hours. We know that he was no longer bleeding. We know that because they didn't find a lot of blood in the car. And we know that he didn't try to hide anything because he left his wife's body in his own apartment, covered with a black blanket. And they're going to suggest covering her with a black blanket was consciousness of guilt. I suggest that it was a gesture to cover her up at that point when he realized what he had done. And that was part of the remorse in which he slashed his wrists and tried to kill himself. Now, when you're in that state where you're attempting to end your own life, where you no longer even want to live, the actions that you take at that point, ladies and gentlemen, I would suggest are not intentional actions. They simply can't be. You can't be thinking straight and trying to kill yourself at the same time. Those are mutually exclusive opportunities. You're either able to control your actions or you're not. You're either intentional or you're not. But you can't be suicidal in a car with your 3-year-old and be held responsible for an accident that takes place when even the accident reconstructionist tells you they could not determine any intentional conduct. We know Jeff was going 35 miles an hour. We know the dump truck was speeding. We don't know how the accident happened. We know that Jeff was not acting appropriately after the accident. He was not engaging with his son the way a normal parent would after an accident. And that's because he had a break with reality. He was under the influence of heat of passion brought on by the recent discovery of his wife's infidelity. After he had forgiven her, and forgiven her, forgiven her. So I'm not asking you to find Jeffrey McGee not guilty. I'm asking you to focus on what this trial is about. It's not about sympathy for Christine McGee, who we can never bring back. It's not about sympathy for Gavin, who has to now live his life without his mom or his dad. It's about what Jeffrey McGee intended to do that night. And I suggest when you put all of the pieces together, when you look at the big puzzle of who he was and what he had done for his family, and the degree to which he forgave his wife over and over and over and over again, that you will understand that there's no other explanation than that he snapped in the heat of passion when he discovered those 2 phone calls. Because why would Christine McGee need to call former lovers? Why would she need to check her voicemail at 10 o'clock at night when she's with her husband and with her son? And unless the affairs weren't over. Unless this wasn't genuine, this attempt to get back together. Jeffrey McGee should be held responsible for what he did. And what he did was he lost control in the heat of passion on reasonable provocation. And I'd ask you under those circumstances to return a verdict of manslaughter for Jeffrey McGee. This is not murder. This is not first-degree murder with malice aforethought. It's not second-degree murder. There is no malice. This is a man who snapped and killed his wife, and he should be held responsible. But it's not murder. And I'm asking you, that you evaluate all the evidence to find him guilty of manslaughter. Thank you.
I don't care about my son. I just want to kill myself and take you with me. Words the defendant used a month before he killed his wife, a month before he tried to kill himself, a month before he tried to kill their son. The defendant had harbored suspicions about Christine's infidelity for months. He first became concerned about Randy back in March. He had known about the Rock of Love since October. He had known about Gary. He had known about Sully for weeks. There was no sudden revelation of adultery. The defendant did not kill his wife in the heat of passion. Christine Ayotte McGee was murdered. She was murdered with premeditation and with extreme atrocity or cruelty. It's simple. If he, the defendant, couldn't have Christine, nobody could. He did not want his wife living her life without him. If he couldn't control her in life, he would control her in death. And sometime during the early morning hours of November 20th, 2007, the defendant carried out his stated intent, his express intent. If he couldn't have her, he was going to kill her. You may not agree with all the decisions that Christine McGee made. You may not understand all the decisions that Christine McGee made. But the Commonwealth submits that the choices Christine made do not justify, do not mitigate brutal murder. The defendant had known that Christine was moving on. He had moved out of their family home on October 2nd. They both began dating other people. Nothing the defendant learned on November 19th was new. This wasn't all one-sided. Him all good, her all bad. Yes, he quit the band. Yes, he got a regular job and worked long hours. He got a promotion. He provided for his family. Christine contributed to the family too. She was the primary caretaker for their son, Gavin. After Gavin was born, Christine became a stay-at-home mother. When the family started to have financial difficulties, she found data processing jobs that she could do from home so that she could be with their son. When that didn't work, she got bartending jobs so that she could be with Gavin during the day and the defendant could be with him at night. They both tried. They both failed. This relationship had its ups and downs from the start. At the very beginning, things were great. They were living the rock and roll lifestyle, which they both clearly enjoyed. They were going out, they were going to gigs, they were staying out late, they were having fun, they were with friends. He was the rock star, and she was the beautiful blonde on his lawn. And then Christine got pregnant. And life and responsibility interfered. And their relationship began to deteriorate. By March of 2007, the defendant got violent. He took a pillow, he put it over his wife's face, suffocated her, choked her, while their son was in bed with them. He apologized. He lost control, he said. Four months later, after Christine had taken him back, he gave her a black eye. He was sorry again. She took him back again. In the spring, Christine had made efforts to move out, to find a place of her own. But she took the defendant back. She tried to make a go of the marriage. They had a son together. She too was willing to forgive. She too was willing to forget. The defendant wants you to discount any testimony and evidence about prior abuse because it came from Margaret Barone. He wants you to discredit everything Margaret told you because she uses drugs and has struggled with substance abuse. For a moment, think about Margaret's testimony in two parts. While the first obviously colors and informs you about the second, think about Margaret's testimony when she spoke about her drug use and treatment, and when she spoke to you about her friends Christine and Jeff's relationship. Margaret told you that on November 9th, 2007, she was using cocaine. Margaret told you that last fall, she received treatment for stress and trauma. She told you that she had lost her brother and her best friend. She started using OxyContin. It became a problem. And while she was receiving treatment for stress and trauma, also addressed her drug use. The Commonwealth suggests that even if you find that Margaret mitigated her use of drugs, her treatment, if she was inconsistent in her answers to those questions, it does not necessarily follow that she lied about everything else. It is up to you each to decide the credibility of each of the witnesses that appeared before you. You can believe all, none, or part of each of a witness's testimony. Think about now Margaret's testimony when she testified about her friends. And yes, that's plural, friends. She hung out with both of them, Jeff and Christine. Their families did things together. Their kids played together. She counseled both of them. She told you she was as sympathetic to the defendant as she was to Christine. Yes, she was best friends with Christine at the end. She had known the defendant longer. But she was listening to both sides. She was making advice and changes for both parties to make. You heard that she reported immediately after being at 9/11 attic the problems in the relationship, the incident in March. Ask yourself, did she have a motive to lie about the relationship and the history between Jeff and Christine? For a moment, I want to talk about October and November of 2007, the last 2 months, and the efforts that the defendant took to both manipulate and to control Christine after he left the family home. He stopped seeing Gavin. He told Margaret it was so, he didn't want to make it easy for Christine to go out. The rock of love. He told Randy, his co-worker, that he didn't want to be made a fool of, and that he was going to call that show, tell them that she was married, and get her kicked off. But at the same time, he was willing to go on the show himself and took steps to get approval for days off from work so that he could do so. November 6th, he wrote a letter to Jill and to Dawn. Dear Jill and Dawn, first of all, I want to apologize for the way I've treated your daughter and grandson for the last few weeks. My behavior was unacceptable. Secondly, I would like to thank you for accepting me and my other children into your close-knit family. We have had some great times at your home, whether it be holidays or cookouts. You have always been more than hospitable to my kids, and I want to thank you for that. I love your daughter very, very much, and I want to show her that again someday. I know she likes the wild side of me, but I really wanted to change for her and Gavin and have the perfect family. I wanted to write this letter so that you would know my true feelings for you and your daughter. I am proud to have you as my in-laws. I am proud to be Uncle Jeff to Corey, and I am so proud to be your daughter's husband. Thanks for the time you're taking to read this letter, and please know I mean everything. He wasn't able to convince Christine, so he reaches out to the parents. The letter was found in Christine's pocketbook. 4 days after that letter was written. After a night in which he had been up all night with Margaret and Diane and Scott, in which he had been questioning, prodding, grilling Margaret about Christine and what she was doing and who she was with and what was going on in her life. 4 days after that letter, he's banging on her door, crack of dawn, pushing his way into that bedroom, and the police are called. At that time, it becomes clear to him he is no longer welcome back in this home. And what does he do? He comes back and clears everything out of that home. That doesn't work. He starts sending threatening texts. Then he sends loving texts. And then what does he do? He starts to see Gavin. He visits Gavin. Who comes back to his life? Christine. Manipulation. Control. For 2 months since the defendant had left that home. Christine's mixed feelings and mixed signals can be explained by the fact that these two parties shared a young child together. Their lives were going to be joined forever because of their child. Ask yourselves, on that night, the 19th into the 20th, did the defendant really believe that they were reconciling? Did he really believe that Christine was not going to talk to anybody else? Or was what he was doing that night controlling, manipulating her so that he could bring her back under his control? You have no evidence that the defendant knew that Christine made a phone call to Gary. You have no evidence that he knew that Christine made a call to Sully. Yes, you will have the phone records. We know that she made a 1-minute call to each of those men that night. But there is no evidence that the defendant knew that she made those calls after they left the train view. They left the train view, went back to Vigents, and left there somewhere between 7:30, 7:45, according to Mark Vigent. The calls were made at 7:47 and 7:49. It's reasonable to infer that they were made while Christine was driving back to the defendant's apartment. We know that she was back at the apartment by 8:02 because Mark Vigent, when he called to check in on the defendant and to let them know that he wasn't coming over to make sure Christine got home, that they were all there. We know from Gavin that his parents fought at some point that night, whether it was before or after the first time they went to sleep. And that during that fight, they were looking for his parents' homes. There's nothing to infer that just because they were fighting that night, just because they were looking for homes, that the defendant knew that the calls had been made, knew about the content of those phone calls, or that anything wasn't said that excited his passion and his emotion again at that time. Again, this was not a sudden revelation of infidelity. He had known about it for months. He had known about these men for weeks. There was nothing new. It was not sudden. Premeditation. Did the defendant think before acting? In addition to the evidence about his statements and his intent regarding murder, back in October, you have Gavin's testimony. You have Gavin's testimony that when he woke up, after going to sleep the first time, it was to his mother crying. That he came out into the living room. And that when he came into the living room, his mother was positioned on the couch with her hands up over her head, half off the couch, just like the crime scene photo. That his father was standing in front of his mother. That his father was choking her with his fists and her neck. And Gavin told you he believed his mother was dead at that time. You know from Dr. Hull she was not. But what did Gavin tell you that his father did? He went to the kitchen. He got 2 knives. He came back with one of them. And he stabbed his mother. The fear of suffocation, the threat of suffocation, where the defendant put that pillow over Christine back in March, and when he choked her back in March, was not enough for him to control her. When he gave her a black eye in July, it was not enough for him to control her. And so that night, in a final attempt to control his wife, he beat her, he gave her another black eye, he choked her, he suffocated her again, And then he went into the kitchen, and he got 2 knives, and he took one of them that was sharp and round, and he came back over, and he put it in his wife, not once, not twice, not 3 times, not 4 times, not 5 times, but 6 times. Those wounds may not have been deep, but she was 4 feet 11 inches, 112 pounds, and they were fatal. That is not the conduct of a man who lost control. That is the conduct of a man who was taking ultimate control of the situation. This case is not about losing control. This case is about maintaining control. And the evidence in this case also shows you that the killing of Christine McGee was committed with extreme atrocity and cruelty. You heard about the extent of the injuries from Dr. Mindy Hull. You heard about the injuries to Christine's right arm, to her left arm, to her right leg, to her left leg. The black eye, the bruise to the upper lip, the subgaleal hemorrhage to the back of the head, the 4 abrasions on the right side of the neck, the abrasion on the left side of the neck, the abrasions and the contusions in the middle of her neck, 4 stab wounds to the left side of her neck, 1 stab wound to the right side of her neck, and a stab wound to her abdomen. The evidence in this case proves that on that night, the defendant beat his wife, he strangled his wife. You heard about the evidence of the petechial hemorrhaging and how that is caused. You heard that after the beating and after the strangling, Christine was still alive. And then the defendant took out the knife and he repeatedly stabbed her. And you heard that after the loss of blood, it takes another 4 to 6 minutes before you get death. That is the evidence in this case. You saw the dagger. Was it the murder weapon? Perhaps. You know from the DNA analysis in this case that the blood on the blade of that knife matched the defendant's DNA profile. You know that the DNA from the minor profile recovered from the handle matched Christine, and you know that occult blood was found on it. You also know from Dr. Hull and her description of the wounds that a double-sided sharp instrument was used. Gavin. The Commonwealth has the burden of proof, a burden to be welcome. The Commonwealth has to prove its case beyond a reasonable doubt. As you have been instructed, openings and closings are not evidence. Attorney Scapiccio can stand up here and tell you that the defendant killed his wife. That is not evidence. While it may be reasonable to infer from the other evidence that the defendant killed his wife, Gavin McGee's testimony leaves no doubt. The defendant made a series of intentional decisions on the 20th of November, 2007. He chose to kill his wife with his son in the room. His son was moving around, crying, crying, crying. And he turned to his son and said, "She'll wake up." The defendant chose to put his son in his car. No car seat, no booster seat, in the front seat strapped in with a lap belt, to drive up to Methuen and to drive him into a 14-wheel dump truck. Gavin is the named victim in 3 of the indictments that are before you for your consideration. The defendant's own actions made Gavin an eyewitness in this case. And let's be clear, the defendant intentionally drove into Mike Hudson's dump truck. Mike Hudzik told you that he saw that car coming from hundreds of yards. He thought it was going fast for the weather that day. It wasn't driving oddly, it wasn't swerving, it was driving fine as it approached him. It got very close to him before he took his eye off of it, and the next thing he knew, he was in his lane of travel. And Lieutenant Walsh confirmed that for you. That accident happened in Mike Hudzik's lane of travel. The defendant drove into oncoming traffic into a 14-wheel dump truck with his child in the car. His child, who was the only eyewitness that was living, who could testify or tell about what had happened in that apartment. The defendant was Gavin's father. He had a duty towards his son. Perhaps, like on October 27th, when he spoke with Margaret, he told himself, "It's not my kid," to explain away his hurtful actions. But he chose to kill his wife in front of his son. He chose to drive his son into a dump truck. Ask yourselves, are those the actions of a loving father? Ask yourselves, does it make sense that he wasn't saying anything to his son following the accident? He had just been unsuccessful in his attempt to kill both himself and his son. This was not an accident. The defendant told the first responders that this wasn't an accident. He was asked specifically, after having revealed this lacerated wrist, after revealing the stab wounds to his chest, he was asked specifically by Lieutenant Cunha, was all this an accident, or did you mean to do it? And he replied, yeah, I meant to do it. He told Dr. Simmons he drove into the dump truck. This was not an accident. This was not caused by a loss of blood, a loss of consciousness. He did not swerve into that truck unintentionally. The defendant's own statements that day tell you so, and the defendant's medical condition tells you that. Firefighter Sean Quick, paramedic Brian Moriarty, and Dr. Mark Simmons all examined the defendant in the aftermath of that collision. He was conscious. He was alert. He was calm. He was oriented to time, place, person. He denied losing consciousness. He showed no signs of an altered mental status. His vital signs were not concerning given the circumstances of what had just occurred. The evidence in this case proves that the defendant was clear-minded and that he knew exactly what he was doing on November 20th. And his actions in the aftermath of the murder, the Commonwealth suggests, signify a consciousness of guilt. He covered his wife's body with a cover. He tried to kill himself by slicing his wrists and stabbing himself in the chest. He then cleaned up. You heard about the forensics that were conducted at the house, the scene analysis back at that apartment. The Commonwealth suggests that it is reasonable to infer, based on Gavin's testimony and the forensic findings at the scene, that the blood in the bathroom, the blood in the tub, the blood on the towel and on the blanket and on the sweatpants in the bedroom, that the defendant changed his clothes, the defendant tended to his wounds. Gavin told you his mother was strangled on that couch. She did not move. She was stabbed on that couch. When the defendant left the apartment that day, he left his cell phone behind. The defendant drove himself all the way up to Methuen, found a 14-wheel dump truck, and drove into it. And think about the defendant and the wherewithal he had at the aftermath of that collision. Sean Quick told you that the defendant asked that his son be removed from the car before he showed him the lacerations to his wrist. And Lieutenant Cunha told you that when he asked, "Where is Gavin's mother?" the defendant replied, "She lives in Tingsboro." While it is technically correct that Christine McGee's address was in Tingsboro, ask yourself, why did he answer, "She lives in Tingsboro," if it was not to buy himself more time, if it was not to delay the discovery of the body after his failed attempt to kill the witness himself? You have all the evidence you need to find this defendant guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. The Commonwealth is content that when you go back into that jury deliberation room, when you carefully consider all of the evidence in this case, you will find, you will agree that the only fair and just verdicts are guilty as charged.